The Emperor has approved your test demonstration, General Mock.
Thank you, Lord Vader. What I unveil today will mark a new era for the Empire.
So yeah, I played the Star Wars Dark Forces remaster. Let me tell you about it. Full disclosure, right out of the gate, I played the original, in the 90s. Yeah, that's right, it was pretty much the first time we had jumping, crouching, and vertical looking as actual mechanics. Now, the point of this is not to dig into the history of the game, it's more to give the sense of what it's like to actually play it. You know, what it's like in the flow state. However, there will be some comparisons. If you're new to the channel, consider sacrificing a few clicks to the greater algorithmic gods and dropping a like, a comment, and subscribing. This channel is still in its infancy and every click counts. This is actually a pretty good time for the remaster to come out, all things considered. This is because boomer shooters have hit their renaissance, and bringing back an older title with newer fidelity is, well, it's really fitting. Plus, I certainly don't mind an extension on said renaissance. I wouldn't mind just keeping the whole thing going myself. Getting to actually experience this game for the first time in the 90s introduced a lot of us to things we'd never seen before, and it was all done on an engine that was made specifically for this game. LucasArts was dragging us all, kicking and screaming, into the world of Star Wars. But what's it like? The flow state of Dark Forces has you running and gunning through a variety of settings, using all kinds of weapons to lay waste to swaths of the Empire forces, oftentimes including the iconic stormtroopers, all the while keeping your mission objectives in the back of your mind, putting together and executing some larger-than-life action movie scenarios. This includes things like breaking into a top-security prison to spring someone out, stealing the plans to the Death Star, or getting tossed into a pit of Kelldragons just to improvise your way out of it. Do you need pre-existing lore knowledge of the Star Wars universe to appreciate Dark Forces? No. I mean, it probably helps, but it doesn't rely on you having to come in prepared. For all it's worth, it's a boom shoot, and there are guys with guns, so pick up a few for yourself and get to blasting. It's just simple fun, really. So for the sake of this conversation, I'll be using strictly the recent remaster release because that's what's out right now, updated, and simply works out of the box for newer systems. That's because it's now running on the Kex engine. Trust me, this is good. Anyway, Star Wars Dark Forces opens up with an immediate text crawl about how the Empire sucks, and the rebels are mostly the good guys. But they needed to outsource some of the more precise tasks. Kyle Katarn, the one they call on, is a mercenary for hire. That's our main character. You'd be forgiven for assuming at first that the story comes through pre-mission blurbs about your objectives as you're dropped in with little to no fanfare. Just a blaster pistol and an Empire compound holding Death Star plans. The cutscenes tend to happen at the end of the mission though. That's the first mission, right there. Stealing the Death Star plans for the Rebel Alliance. Bust in the place, shoot the first KST, and steal his blaster rifle. That's all the pistol is good for. Shooting a guy, taking his rifle. The rifle's going to be a mainstay for the rest of the game. The first level is going to give you a pretty clear idea of how the rest of the game is going to play out too. It displays the verticality, the most common enemy types, and the most common type of combat scenarios. The rest of the levels kind of build on that and add something new of their own each time. Here though, it's rather important to note two things in particular. First, certain enemies drop keys, and as is standard fare, keys are pivotal to progression. Second, this hologram blew our minds in 1995. So you go through the level, opening up new areas within it, until eventually, you find what you came for, in this case, the Death Star plans, and then escape. Most levels work within this framework, and it lends a sort of open level design feel to the whole experience. And that's the flow state of Dark Forces, bouncing back and forth, opening up new areas. Every kill not only helps to create safer passage for the next time you cross an area, but also a source of ammunition to keep it going. All with one or two particular goals in mind, and as Kyle Katarn, the Empire is not about to stop you. No, it's really more of a James Bond meets the Doomslayer, because one moment it's a couple of dozen of the Empire's finest, and the next you're doing some spy stuff in the elevator shafts. And the next you're surfing sewer water on your way to a rendezvous. After escaping with the Death Star plans, the Rebel Alliance basically moves to hire Kyle Katarn full-time, and has a list of missions, but all with one central goal. Stop General Mock's plans for creating and deploying Dark Troopers, the cyber demons of Dark Forces. Kyle agrees so long as he can keep his comms operator, Jan Ors. Jan serves the purpose of mission briefings and acts as your getaway driver from this point forward. The next step is to pay a visit to a rebel base that the Empire just leveled, in search of a clue regarding the Dark Trooper project. There's a caveat, however. The Empire troops are still here. Now, the only actual mission goal is to find that clue and escape. But, to accomplish that, you'll need to not only turn the power back on, but also operate some of the local heavy machinery in order to get from point A to B, just because that's how bad the attack was. I'd like to say here that this is a very memorable level, but the thing is that every level is memorable for one reason or another, and most of these reasons are good ones. Yes, upon entering the tech base on Talay, it is dark-ish. It's night, and there are no lights on. Some Empire troops are waiting in the corners to ambush until you arrive at the base itself, where some of them are just scouring the remains. It isn't long before the whole task force is alerted to your presence. Keep your head on a swivel here because there are so many corners and pockets for them to hide in. Eventually, you'll come to a bar, because it's Star Wars and there may be a contractual obligation to have a bar scene, but anyway, it's very dark inside, you have a handy headlight to see your way around, you just need to find a window in the back, upstairs, and hop out. You can turn the power back on at the water turbine behind it. Now all the doors are openable and the rest of the machinery is functional. You'll be using some more water flow based machinery later to get across a gap and reach the headquarters. After clearing the courtyard to the HQ, you still have to go inside, and opening the door will greet you with one of the more iconic moments of Dark Forces. You open this door into a face full of hot laser. And really that's it. Find the remnants of the Dark Trooper weapon and head back to the ship. Mind you, even if you have killed everyone on the way in, you'll still have a bit of friction leaving because another strike force has been sent in to find and apprehend you. Don't let the Empire ruin their track record for failures. This is going to lead you to the most infamous level of Dark Forces, and honestly I think it gets a bit of a bad rap. Yes, it is a sewer level and it has a semblance of a maze, but it's really rather straightforward. First things first, there's a supply depot before you even begin to explore the level, just in case you came here with little to no supplies. If you dick around a lot, you may have to make another attempt, but the simple answer is that all you need to do for the first part is flip this switch in the middle to open a corresponding door out of the main atrium. If you flip it once and go through the first door it opens, there's quite a diegetic explanation of what's going to get you past the entire segment. You're led to a platform in which you have one switch and a big window showing you what that switch does. This demonstrates the kind of switches you need to find, what they will do, and also that one switch wasn't enough. Each segment circles back to the main atrium, so even if you missed a switch or do things out of order, you're always led back to the start until it is solved. All you really have to do is go in order. Go back, open the second one, which you should know by passing through now is where you're dumping all of the sewage using those switches. Where you can see it filling up and raising the water level? The sewage level? Anyway, just skip down each path once, and the fourth one doesn't even have a switch, it's entirely optional and pretty much just for supplies. Speaking of supplies, it is implied that you really don't need to kill everything on this level. You totally can, and I'm pretty sure there's enough ammo in the level alone to do it. But it's going to burn off your stock fairly quickly. Just skip past most of these crap demons. Jumping through the mud makes you a little too quick for them to catch. When you do get all of these switches flipped, you can skate on through to the last segment of the level where there's some minor platforming that's only made a nuisance by these grenade-tossing bastards. A few jumps here, a few jumps there, and you've found your contact. Take him by force. Do some interrogating, you know? Moth Rebus gives you the information necessary to find the Imperial weapons site that's working on the prototype weapons for the Dark Troopers. This level is kind of a banger, actually. It's going to begin with getting dropped off on a cliff with the express intent to locate and infiltrate the entire Empire base, here. A handful of neat things are going on in this level. First off, the design is sprawling, and there are multiple ways to achieve the same goal, as in different paths leading to the same place. Another thing you're absolutely sure to notice here is the turrets. In the original release, these did not stand out quite like they do here, but, well, all of the rest of the enemy designs are sprites, which is a 2D design, and the turrets are 3D polygonal models. They really stand out, and they look kinda horrendous in comparison with everything else. What the turrets do, though, is add a different type of hazard from your standard enemy fare. Instead of having a blaster firing red shots like the Empire soldiers, it fires bigger, slower, green shots that are extremely accurate and do shitloads of damage. To make matters worse, the turrets are always plastered to the ceiling, which makes throwing something like a thermal detonator grenade at them a lot more tricky. They may be stationary, but the placement and style of attack oftentimes makes them a much more veritable threat than any of the Empire soldiers. And lastly, the third game-changing concept you'll find here is a new weapon, the Imperial Repeater. This gun fires in a similar pattern to the blaster with its primary fire. However, it takes a completely different ammo type. So now you have something to switch to if you run out of one ammo type. It also doubles as a shotgun, with the secondary fire shooting out 3 projectiles in a triangular pattern simultaneously. So to recap, this one new weapon, familiar gun, new function, new ammo type. Take your time to appreciate that concept now, because everything else is going to fall into a category that you already have, for the rest of the game, outside of one weapon towards the end. Kinda. In fact, this is as good of time as any to discuss the arsenal. That's because you pretty much have seen everything. The blaster rifle and the Imperial Repeater and the thermal detonator grenades are pretty much everything Dark Forces has to offer fundamentally. The arsenal expands, but under these core tenets. So that's not to say it's literally everything. Check this out, a 4-barreled plasma gun that you would hope would do considerably different things from what you already have is actually just kind of a copy of the Imperial Repeater. No joke, they both have projectiles that fire slower than the blaster, have a spread fire alt, and use the same ammo. And then there's the mortar. It's practically a reskin of the thermal detonator grenades with a slight difference. You can fire it faster than you can throw the grenades, but you can't control the trajectory like you can when you throw one of the grenades. And that end of itself works just by holding the fire and letting go, with the longer you hold it being the harder you throw it. Like the dynamite from Blood. The only weapon that tries to be unique anymore is the Dark Trooper weapon. It still has quite a standard primary fire with slow-moving projectiles that do a lot of damage, and an alt fire that fires a rocket, which is just another explosive, but this one shoots straight. So that's not very out of the box either, but at least it uses its own ammo types. But now we are ahead of ourselves. We are still at the weapons research facility, and this facility branches off in a few directions, some with rewards, some with very little, and it all lends itself to a bit of environmental believability. To get inside even has a few different options, but the best may be to go in through an air vent. It does have turrets packed in it, but it also has a pair of night vision goggles if you didn't find them in the TAC base. Once you get to the actual site with the ongoing research, there's a bit of switch flipping you'll have to do to move this walkway around a central cylinder in what I can only describe as a renovated silo. You'll need it to release 3 locks on the side so you can actually access what's sitting there in the center like it's not radioactive as hell. Why else would it be like this? It's frick metal, and that's what they use to build the Dark Troopers' big fricking guns with, so they can just go around blasting the frick out of everything. Now it's time to go find where they're mining it and blow it the frick up. Okay, maybe I got a little carried away, but that's actually what it's called, and that's what we're doing next. Shutting the mines down. This level is designed to put your platforming skills and potentially your patience to the test. It's actually not that bad if you follow the intended path, but there are a handful of winding corridors where you'll be dodging mining drills and looking at other tunnels that appear to be a secret or a shortcut and tempt you to make a difficult jump, when in reality, it's just a part of the path ahead of where you're at. The mines are fairly short too, you just have to reach the bottom and set up a bomb. Don't even worry about an escape sequence. I mean, it will happen, but you're not timed as far as I know. But maybe do worry about a prototype Dark Trooper that will make the attempt to stop you. You can totally avoid most of what it can do to you, just don't get too carried away with the guns because it can deflect projectiles back at you. The safest course of action is to just use thermal detonators. After that then, of course, is the obligatory escape sequence, short, sweet, to the point, and thankfully actually not retreading the path down. During this time, one of the more important rebels, a spy in the Empire and one of our informants, has gotten himself captured. Now it's time to bust him out. Now it's time for the detention center. Now it's time to mention that if you want a spoiler-free experience, but would also like the packaged version of my thoughts, I'll put a timestamp here. But this is a game from the 90s, and we're not here for the depth of the story. With that settled, the detention center sucks. It's not going to bring the game to a halt, it's just going to be annoying. There's like a dozen force fields you can only see due to a blinking border around an effective doorway. Some of them, most of them, just stop working for a few seconds every so often, and that's your moment to step through. On top of that, everything here is so reflective that lasers and plasma ricochet off of everything, like 5 or 6 times per shot. It's nuts. This level, though, actually, it does have a neat design to it, albeit not very straightforward. It's got some branching paths and a lot of it is optional. For instance, there's a couple of cells you can dig up the codes for and just unlock for loot, provided that you deal with the armed prisoners inside. What you really gotta do here is set the 2 main elevators at specific positions laid out in this diagram in the vents, so that you can pass through the ventilation and James Bond your way into the high security holding cells. Nothing is gonna stop my boy Kyle from springing a fellow rebel. Although it's probably prudent to mention that the cracks in the walls in this level are very much designed to give you the Zelda vibe. And it vibe checks. It's another part of bypassing a chunk of the level. Find the crack in the wall, hit it with a bomb, in this case a thermal detonator, and you don't want to run out of those. Here we go. Crix Maydeen, the informant we're here to spring, starts talking about smugglers running supplies to the general who's making all the Dark Trooper stuff. So now it's time to put a tracker on one of these smuggler ships, the Ramsey said. To do this, it's simple. Murder everyone in and around the ship, the whole time avoiding explosions because the entire ship is laced with trip mines and explosive barrels. It's just pop rocks everywhere. Scoot to one end of the ship for the keys to get into the other end of the ship and slap a tracker, because if there's one thing these smugglers are going to do after losing the entire crew and having 642 bombs go off on board the ship, it's continue business as usual. Actually, it's a pretty cool level. Just watch your step. By this time, you've probably noticed that the stormtroopers have one very specific weakness, and it corresponds with the movies too. It's the shift key. If you're moving any faster than a walk, there's a good chance they'll miss and start firing everywhere. That's why here in Ramsey's head, the game starts putting them in more confined spaces. There's one more stop to make that Maydeen mentioned, a robotics facility. Here's the tricks and traps for the uninitiated. Look, the ice really sucks, and if you stop moving on it, chances are you're going to want to propel yourself forward with explosives. It works, it's painful, and the fix for all of that is real easy. Just hang a right from the start, and keep hanging every right until you hit a chasm. The ice boots are hiding on the edge here. Fixes everything by disabling the ice physics. It's probably supposed to be a surprise or a reward later, but the ice physics are pretty bad. After that, work on getting into the facility, where the bulk of your time is spent crawling around on active and moving machinery and trying not to get pulverized in an obscene manner. Sometimes it's crushers. Sometimes it's turrets. Sometimes it's an ambush, usually on conveyor belts. The last trap is a plunge into a toxic gas-filled environment. Pay attention because you'll land directly on a gas mask and may not notice or know how to use it, but it is in your keybinds. Now, you're on a timer though, and there are batteries sprinkled around that you can use to buy more time as you come face to face with the first of the fully developed Dark Troopers. They're like cyber demons with an additional plasma rifle and a jetpack, but slow, very slow. In this environment, it's actually not that much of a threat. More of a threat is a few prototype Dark Troopers on the way out. Here's a little hint though, if you want to cheese them, and cheese them hard, you can actually just crouch and aim up at them and fire away with one of the more rapid fire weapons. They'll get basically stun locked, trying to deflect shots, and from this angle, that'll all hit the ceiling and they can't block them all either. Trust me, if you look hard enough, there's plenty of cheese in this game to go around. We'll talk about the Kell Dragons in a minute. First, Nar Shaddaa. Okay, it's a huge cityscape, and that's a nice concept. The execution and level design here is where Dark Forces really shows its 90s. There are sections with large areas connected by narrow passageways and very little done to discern one wall from another. I want to like this level, but some areas come off in an abstract way and that's glaringly unintentional. However, Nar Shaddaa is populated with several Trandashans packing concussion rifles. These guys are absolutely the most dangerous and difficult enemies of the game. It's specifically because of the concussion rifles. They aim, and an area kind of explodes. They don't need to hit you to hurt you, but it doesn't help that they have incredible aim. To make it worse, there's no foolproof way to deal with them, and they'll be a thorn in your side from now on. Well, at least it makes things interesting. Right, so we're here to corroborate some Imperial navigational evidence with the tracker we put on the Ramsey's head, so we can find a very specific Star Destroyer called the Arc Hammer. But really, this level can get a little convoluted if you're not paying attention. Make sure to check the dark corners because you'll only find the keys you need in the back alley, hole-in-the-wall kinds of places. That, and again, a lot of this is actually optional. All you really need is to find one specific key and return to near the beginning of the level to get into the Imperial offices and hangars. You don't have to go far. Explore it at least once, right? It's a pretty cool map, a little chaotic, and textures could have been used a lot better, but the design showcases small sections of the cityscape and puts them all together. Either way, this level is almost entirely skippable on a return trip once you know which key you need and where it's at. Once you do have the data you need, it's time to, get abducted by Jabba. This is where so many people get filtered. You get thrown into a pit, surrounded by Kell Dragons, amount based on difficulty, yes, and you gotta punch them to death. People on Reddit are still lamenting the Kell Dragon pit. However, regardless of difficulty, you only need to kill one. At least in the beginning before you have your guns back. One. Let's talk about this for a minute. To kill a Kell Dragon, you step forward and swing. As long as you're moving backward, preferably in a run when their mouth is open, they'll miss. Easier said than done, I know. But once you kill the first Kell Dragon, the pit opens to reveal more, and technically, you can just escape now. The impression this map gives is that you have to kill them all, and this is because there's a lever to raise a walkway that you can use to get to the ledge where the key is at. But if the dragons are roaming, they'll knock the walkways back down. Start thinking like a prisoner. This is footage from hard mode, and here's how it's done. Knock out the first Kell Dragon, duck into the tunnel in the middle of the next room. There you'll find 2 Gran, one on lower difficulties, and instead of letting them toss grenades at you or knock your teeth out, you just do the same thing you do fighting the dragon. Bait their first swing like a revenant from Doom and take your swing at them. These guys drop prison ladders. Stand directly in between both walls in this tunnel. Look away from the lower one, with the backboard behind it. It's about to catch you. Now look down as far as you can, charge up a thermal detonator all the way, and let go of it right after you jump. Here's your key. Go ahead and leave. Very shortly after this exchange, you'll find all of your stuff in a nest bundle hanging from the ceiling in a guard room. The rest of the level is pretty straightforward. You just have to get the nav card back and go get Jan out of her cell. Oh yeah, there's mines everywhere, but at least I saved you all the trouble of trying to punch all the Kell Dragons to death. And before the thought crosses your mind, it's not enough thermal detonators for all of them, and you'll need a couple saved for the next room. And that's the filter. The hardest level, the one that makes people quit. The rest of the game is basically on the home stretch now, and all the tricks pulled on you so far are going to culminate in some punishing, yet rewarding level design. At the very least, there are no more Kell Dragon pits. The last act of the game brings all of the things you've encountered so far together, aside from the Kell Dragon pit, to really develop on the challenge and test the player on what's been learned so far. So the next stop is in the Imperial City itself to decrypt the navigation data, and for obvious reasons, everything is going to be a gunfight. If you like the shooting, and I guess you kinda should if you made it this far, this level is awesome. First, you need to find the building that's got the stuff to decrypt it, and this place is crawling with Imperial soldiers. Everything is a gunfight. If you find yourself in a pinch or need to get crafty, just back up around a corner and toss a thermal detonator. Once you find the right building, you'll need to climb to the roof before hopping over to the actual correct building and going back down inside that one. Once on top, avoid the spotlights. Or don't. More enemies, but more loot too. The next building is where shit gets real interesting. There's actually a puzzle to solve before getting into the center of this data processing contraption. It's a simple puzzle for what it is, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. You do a few laps around the outer ring, setting doors in the right position of these 3 rings so that you can access the spots that let you go from the outer ring to the middle and from the middle to the inner, and there you go. You can decrypt the data and get the hell out. Now, where this spits you out at isn't too far from your extraction point, but there's a caveat, and it's also a gunfight. Boba Fett has been hired to drop you, here and now. Lucky for you, he pretty much takes it easy on you. It's not even as dangerous as a Dark Trooper. He just zips around and fires rockets. Sidestep the rockets and use something with a faster projectile speed, because he's fairly mobile. Once you fix that issue, Jan's back with your ride out. This still doesn't tell you where the arc hammer is because it stays moving to avoid being found, but it does tell us where to find the one smuggler ship that moves supplies out to it. Now it's time to hijack a ship at a space gas station. While that sounds awesome, this level is the weakest of the bunch. It's a large circle that ships pull up to for refueling. You have to kinda open up a few areas and get into the controls for the station itself and move the bridge from your ship to the smuggler ship and leave the station using that bridge. I'm gonna gloss over this one because there's not much more to it than that. The combat is sparse, the level is mostly straightforward, and even the design choices that stand out here involve waiting around. This is a gas station. Fortunately, things pick up after you hijack the smuggler ship, because the next level has you docked in an Imperial ship that's about to meet up with the arc hammer. This level just has a consistent flow to it. As it opens up, they know you're here and it's about to get dicey. After that, you'll be fighting across hangars as you see TIE fighters come and go, jump across some things that look like this. Then, it's time to move a shipping container through the ship using terminals and moving from room to room as you see the container being repositioned each time you push the next button or use one to rotate it and the next to seat it into a loading position. This level ends once you get yourself inside the box, and that's now positioned to be sent to the arc hammer. Won't they be surprised, huh? The Arc Hammer. Here we are, at last. This is by far the biggest level, and we're going out with a bang. Everything is here, the enemy roster, minus the Kell Dragons, of course. The objectives. There's 3 key points in the ship that we're going to slap bombs on to shear it apart at the center. We're traveling through the functioning systems of the ship here, including hazards like the machinery functioning in several sectors. However, more often than not, the functioning machinery is a method of traversal or an obstacle. There are soldiers everywhere. Prototype Dark Troopers and full-scale Dark Troopers are positioned to defend key points from your intrusion. Working droids that take a break from maintaining the ship to take pot shots at you, the whole bucket of fish. You move from sector to sector, planting bombs, each sector providing an obstacle different from the last, and each one being locked off until you plant the bomb in that area. So you can't get too far off course and have to backtrack through the whole level. Planting the bombs isn't everything though. Once that's done, it's time to hit the hangar for an escape ride. However, General Mach, the main antagonist who has been the one behind the Dark Trooper project, decides to suit up in the biggest and best Dark Trooper suit yet just to kick your ass for shooting up his ride.
It's been a long time since I've challenged a man to battle. I'm glad my opponent is so worthy.
It's time for the final boss of Dark Forces. A bigger, faster, and more durable Dark Trooper. It's twofold as a nice touch, but also anticlimactic. Thematically on point, but there are no new mechanics here whatsoever, aside from a few extremely ineffective mines he dumps out sometimes. Drop him like a sack of bricks and pull a GTA on this Imperial shuttle they have packed away in the back, to bail on the Arc Hammer before it does the thing. And that's it. We blew up the Arc Hammer and put a punctuated end to the Dark Trooper project. And yeah, we may have gotten up to other hijinks in the process, like stealing Death Star plans and all. The gameplay of Dark Forces would be rather difficult to pin down if you want to stare at it from both ends. By the standards of 1995, this was incredibly complex, but not unnecessarily though, and by today's standards, it's rather basic. So here's the thing, right? Let's take it all within its own context. The gameplay works, it's not overly convoluted, and it all makes sense, very much so, within the confines of the game itself. The weapons feel great to use, they're consistently effective against the enemies who also feel pretty good to have as enemies, and even though it can seem otherwise, none of them run off hit scans. Each projectile is simulated in real time and given the right tactics can be avoided. The game flows real well, in fact, and with modern touches like mouse look and, let's be honest, the Kex engine, in this case, it holds up today and stands alongside modern boomer shooters. Yes, there are simplistic elements in its design with the enemies and weapons, but there are also some more detailed elements specifically with the level design and focus on objectives and sometimes out-of-the-box thinking to solve some of the more puzzle-adjacent segments. And, unlike a disturbing amount of games, the puzzly bits don't detract on a repeat playthrough by drying out the gameplay for something you've already solved, because each piece is punctuated with the combat to keep things moving at a healthy clip. Once more, I'd like to reiterate that each level is unique, and I do mean that in a good way. Sometimes games get caught up in making things unique and it gets really muddied by everything being so distant from one moment to the next. Dark Forces has the right cohesion to bring each level to the table with not only that right unique variety, but also similar enough to get comfortable with. Now, for a couple of things you should know going in is that even though this is a 90s shooter, there are no quick saves. Not a negative, actually, I think this works quite well for the game it's in. Saving only really happens in between levels, and as you unlock levels, you can basically just pick a level and go. You aren't going to get stuck in an unwinnable situation due to this because you'll start each level with not only your arsenal from before, including secret items you may have found earlier than necessary, but at least 3 lives. Yes, there is a lives system in Dark Forces, and when you die you can respawn directly adjacent to your death position, and you can find extra lives in secrets. For industry veterans, however, these extra lives are going to be invalidated by my next point. Difficulty. On lower difficulties, this game could be great for newcomers to the genre, while on the hardest difficulty, it's not actually going to be that bad, but it's not going to push you to your limits if you're comfortable with boomer shooters. It is enough to keep it interesting, and in some of the later levels, you're likely to spend a life or two on traps or clever enemy placement, but it's not boringly easy, but it's not crushingly difficult. On the flip side of that coin, it's only fair to point out what doesn't come across as well. So, first, I want to point out the terrible sprite clipping. Sometimes the sprites of the enemies bleed through the geometry in front of them, worse with the more mobile enemies. It is really a minor gripe, but it drives me nuts and I can't unsee the horrible clipping. Another specific issue is with the robotics facility level. The ice surrounding the facility is thankfully the only time you encounter ice mechanics in this game, but it is shit. Hell, it's worse than I remember it being. If you stop on the ice, well, at least remember that explosives like the thermal detonators will propel you away from the epicenter of the explosion, so in a pinch you can blast your way across the ice. However, right now, just going to mention again that you can get the ice boots to turn off the ice physics just by hugging the right wall until you get to the chasm. It is a part of the level variety, but this one is bad. Speaking of variety, the arsenal of weapons and roster of enemies are both lacking in variety, actually highlighted by redundancy. The arsenal has 10 weapons, but inside of that there's 3 types, and one weapon that blends 2 pre-existing types: lasers, plasma, explosives. All weapons in the categories are just too similar to one another to be different weapons. For instance, the plasma weapons have an accurate rapid-fire primary, making them work for longer range engagements with the caveat of a slower projectile speed than the other weapons. They also have a spread-fire secondary that fires multiple projectiles to melt things in close encounters with the caveat of drastically reduced rate of fire. Why? Why are these copies instead of having different weapons focus on different aspects? Or trim the fat on the copy and just drop it. You could have one of these that's focused on the rapid fire, slow projectile, and you could have one that's focused on the spread fire, and have 2 different weapons with 2 different functions, or just have one that does both. But why have 2 that do both? The other half is that the first 3 enemies of the roster are basically just palette swaps one another, but one type can drop keys. Stormtroopers, officers, and commandos fire lasers and drop ammo for lasers, walk in the same patterns, and fire at nearly the same intervals with slight differences in damage. Honestly, if they had been noticeable differences in behavior, that's all it would need to set them apart and enhance the feeling of fighting different types of Empire soldiers. In conclusion though, Dark Forces is more of a throwback than a modern fit. It's not going to challenge you the way that some of the more recent titles will, but it's not going to fall flat either. There's enough mechanics and style unique to the game here that makes it worth a spin for the boomer shooter aficionado. For fans of that specific subgenre, this is a definite recommendation. However, I don't think the title has that much to offer someone who's only a fan of the more modern subgenres of FPS games, but hey, there is one more thing to consider. Early Star Wars games had this magic to them for being able to easily imagine this other world that you're exploring for a time. I think that's specifically nostalgia speaking, so maybe this would be a win for Star Wars fans. Or at least fans of the original trilogy. And the bar to entry isn't ridiculous or anything, the difficulty's not going to crush you. The playthrough I did for this video was on the hard difficulty, and there's plenty of room backward to take a more casual approach if you're not that well versed in FPS games. Who would I recommend Star Wars Dark Forces to? Well, with the current remaster, I'd say this is a pretty good fit for boomer shooter fans as well as newcomers to the genre, far more than it would be for a fit for fans of the franchise with limited to no interest in this type of game, but it is easy to run, has a few modern concessions, and overall sticks tightly to its lane. With that, allow me to thank you for making it this far and letting me prattle on about yet another game I enjoyed. I'll see you in the next Flow State review. Soup Can Tactics out.